Salvation Army co-founder Catherine Booth said, "If we are to better the future, we must disturb the present." This is the Disturbance podcast from Salvation Army Women's Ministries. Haere mai, and welcome to the Disturbance podcast. This week we're celebrating Matariki, which I'm so excited about, and I'm sure we're all excited about. It's a historical moment in our history, as it's the first ever public holiday to celebrate Matariki, the Māori New Year. Amiria, what would be a great greeting for Matariki?
Simply kia ora, Ingrid. Hei Matariki.
Hei Matariki.
Yeah.
Hei
Matariki.
Well, Hei Matariki Amiria Te Whiu. I'm really honoured to have you here today with us. Amiria is Auxillary-Captain, and she is the National Māori Ministries Development Coordinator for Community Ministries. That's quite a mouthful. I'll have to get you to explain that to us soon. Let's just say we're very blessed to have you in the Salvation Army. You have spent many years as an ordained Amorangi minister for Te Aka Pūaho, the Presbyterian Church. Amiria has also worked as a national coordinating chaplain for corrections and Serco prison chaplaincy services in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And you've served as the officiating captain for the Royal New Zealand Navy at the Devonport Naval Base. Amiria has an academic background in theology and education. That's a very brief overview of your stunning resume. Amiria, you were telling me earlier that you've worked for 40 years for the Presbyterian Church, which is really incredible. You also have 6 adult children, 13 mokopuna, and 2 great-grandchildren. So you've got your hands full still. And we're just so blessed to have you join us here at the Salvation Army. I'm really excited about this chat, this special Matariki chat, where I just want to sit here really as a learner and learn from you, Amiria. Can you start by just telling us a bit about yourself, your story and your faith background?
Te tuatahi, ka mihi atu ki te atua, tō mātou kei whakaora. Tēnā koe e pā. Ka huri ki a koe, Ingrid, ngā mihi ki a koe mō tō tāua kōrero, whiri i ngā kōrero i tēnei wā, hei Matariki. There are 4 sides to me, Ingrid. I affiliate to Ngāpuhi, and my hapu within Ngāpuhi is Te Hikatu, Ngāti Rāhiri and Ngāti Kaua. Now, the unique thing about my Ngāpuhi side is that we are the kaitiaki of Te Tiriti Waitangi.
Wow.
And that's very special to me. I have a Tainui side as well, also very, very important to me, the kingitanga. Mm-hmm. And my hapu there is Ngāti Tamatera. Then I affiliate to Te Aroa, which is another iwi, further down the North Island, and Ngāti Whakaue is my hapu there. And then, of course, Tūhoi, Whakatohia, in the area of Te Kutarere. So those are my connections, tribal-wise. My faith journey started at a very, very young age. I met Jesus at the age of 5.
Wow.
At the age of 15, I became a youth leader, and I was ordained minister by the time I was 27 years of age. Wow. And now at a very late age of 60 plus, I am an auxiliary captain for the Salvation Army. I was born to serve God. I was raised to serve God, and I continue to serve God until the race has ended, or until he calls me home. Kia ora.
Kia ora. That's so beautiful. Well, first of all, I just want to ask you about Matariki, because this is what we're celebrating today. I know you can't speak for all Māori, but I think us Pākehā, we've got a bit of a bad tendency to call it a new holiday, which of course it isn't a new holiday at all. I'd love to for you to share some of your perspective about what Matariki really means and what wisdom it holds within the celebration.
I think, first of all, Matariki is a celebration that has been an event that has existed for my tupuna, my ancestors, for a very, very long time. It lines up with the biblical harvests and the gathering of food. For my tupuna, it was about harvesting the crops in midwinter.
Wow.
And so the whole season of Matariki is about bringing in the crop, is about celebrating the harvest and the bountiful yield that comes in year after year.
Wow.
My tupuna used to plant by the stars, plant by the seasons. And so they would watch for the Matariki stars. Now, Matariki, the equivalent to that is Pleiades. Pleiades. I've never been able to say that right, but the seven sister stars. And they appear about mid-June, but every winter the dates change.
Yes.
Right? So we find ourselves celebrating Matariki on different dates. It's not fixed. But my tupuna would watch for the stars, and they would know when to bring the crops in. The appearance of the Matariki stars also signified when to plant in future time. So they would watch the stars. Most would say that there are 9 stars. We can only see 7 with the naked eye, and you can faintly see the other 2 stars during certain times of the season. But Matariki is very special for us as Māori. It's about gathering. We've commercialised Matariki, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but we mustn't lose the real meaning and understanding of what it is. And it was planting by the seasons. And I remember my grandfather, you know, he had the most beautiful gardens in a little place called Putararu. And, you know, my grandparents were very humble people. They had a shack, really, that they lived in, and there were no floors in it.
Wow.
It was all, I can remember as a child, a polished dirt floor.
Really?
And it had kind of a little staging area within the hut that was for sleeping. There was a sleeping area. And so the beds would be made up at night and we'd gather there. But the special time was when my grandfather would bring in the yield. And there was a certain tapu around that too for women. So we were only allowed into his garden, you know, at a certain time of the harvesting time. So it was really a tapu place.
Wow.
So, and karakia were, you know, my grandparents, I remember them getting up and praying, you know, and just praying for their heart, for their gardens, for the whānau, for well-being and growth, especially around crops. When it was time to harvest, well, we had the biggest hakari there was to be had. So Matariki is special to me in many ways.
And you know what, as I was just listening to you, I was thinking there's so much knowledge tied up in Matariki. It's not just a holiday of the so-called New Year. There is astrological knowledge, but there's horticultural, biological, astrophysics. This incredible wealth of knowledge and it sets you up for the year ahead, right? So there's all this sort of like thinking about what's coming up, and it's really profound. It's a profound holiday. Thank you for giving me a little glimpse into what life was like around Matariki for you. I think that's really cool.
Absolutely. Here, let me just share a little one thing further. I mean, here last year we celebrated Matariki as a staff, and so you know, we were able to put on a huge display of different crops, and we ate a hangi meal together, and there was some education around what Matariki means for Māori and how we can celebrate that. So Salvation Army has begun to celebrate Matariki in special ways.
Awesome. Hei Matariki. I'm going to try and just keep that in the conversation because I want it to I want us to start saying Hei Matariki to each other in the corridors when we pass by each other. Amiria, was awesome to hear a little bit about your faith journey at the beginning. What made you decide to join the Salvation Army whānau?
That's a good question. Well, firstly, I had taken early retirement
Wow.
from ministry with the Presbyterian Church to go and study theology.
Mm.
And I met Suzanne Fincham, who was the chief secretary of the time, and we formed a very, very special bond. I can't explain it, but we just connected. Awesome. You know when you connect to people. And she spoke volumes to me in terms of her faith and her making me feel included, even though I wasn't. And so there was a bond built there. Later on, I was invited by Ian Hudson to come and facilitate the Māori Ministry Review across the country, and that took me 5 months to carry out. And from that, I wrote a report and then a proposal, but I knew that I couldn't continue the conversation unless I was part of the discussion and around the discussion table. But that's not the reason why I'm here. I really felt God calling me into this place. And I kept saying, there was a resistance in me. I was saying, no, I am done with ministry. I want to study. Yeah, absolutely. But God had other plans.
You never retire from the kingdom.
Absolutely not. And so I found myself saying yes. And at the same time, I applied to become an auxiliary captain. It's an alternative pathway into Salvation Army. But I guess my age, I was able to do that, and my experience and qualifications. So, and so I'm here. Wonderful. But at the time of my appointment, I don't think they really knew what to do with me. But it was an interesting call, and it's been a really interesting journey with Salvation Army. One that I've sort of enjoyed. It's been like a roller coaster. I'm not sure where it's taking me. Suffice to say, I know why I'm called, and I'm here to serve God and His people.
Wonderful. And I'm sure you'll be continuing this journey within the Salvation Army, but you were a reverend in the Presbyterian Church for so long, and I was wondering, how did you navigate Te Ao Māori in a very English institution?
But allow me to say this first. It's not an institution that defines me. It's not an institution who makes me Māori. It's my Māoriness in me that I bring to the establishment of the Salvation Army. And I think for many Pākehā, they need to understand that I was born Māori. So ka puta mai au ki roto te ao, he Māori, he hara te kreiti ana. And what I just said to you there, Ingrid, was when I was birthed, I was born as Māori, born in the image of God. And I understand that it's not about my physical likeness, but my likeness in the image of His character, of His being, of who He is. And so I come as a Māori. At the age of 15, I was saved. God saved me. He redeemed me. And what a blessing. So I've learned to be Christian in my Māori skin. I hear a lot of Christians saying, oh, well, you've got to, if you're Christian, you're Christian. And a lot of Christians over the years have, argued the point of there's no a Jew or Gentile, we're all the same. And I have to say, well, actually we're not. I am who I am, you are who you are. And so over the years, I have learned to contribute myself into the spaces that I traverse. And that's even here in the Salvation Army.
Absolutely.
So, yes, I have been able to bring my Māoriness here.
Yeah, wonderful.
Historically and traditionally, mainstream churches, that's what I want to make a point about. The Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Anglicans and the Catholics have made it easy for Māori to belong. because they've established Māori synods where Te Ao Māori is given absolute mana status within
Really
those church organisations, where tikanga and cultural practices are observed and practised and, importantly, honoured. And that's very important. If we want Māori to feel that they belong in our establishments, our Christian establishments, sometimes that might require us to create a different environment. So we often expect Māori to come and fill the pews of our churches. And in a way, it's almost like assimilation again, assimilating them into an environment that's very foreign to them. And that's what I love about the mainstream churches, is that they have already done this work. They have already established well-grounded synods where Māori, Pacific Island, Asian pastors are fronting those churches and growing their congregations and making their communities safe in that environment. It's easy for us to say, he mama no iho, easy, we belong.
So what does it look like to honour tikanga Māori within the church tradition? What's special about tikanga Māori faith?
It's the uniqueness and the richness and the depth of understanding that we have when we speak about God in our own reo. And I don't think we as a mainstream organisation can ever grasp that unless you're immersed in that. But for us, it is something really unexplainable. It's about being in the presence of God, in the safety of our own environment, being able to express our worship and our way of being in our Māoriness, and it's accepted.
I actually have heard a bit recently about this concept that, so me as a Pākehā, I think that the Pākehā worldview is the normal worldview, and we're not very good at being in touch with the sort of the spiritual world. It's a bit foreign to us to have these experiences, and we think that's the norm, but in fact we're the odd ones out, because cultures all over the world accept, and it's very much part of their being, that they accept and understand the spiritual world, and that actually it's European Pākehā culture that's weird, not these other cultures. And so it's actually, we should be learning to assimilate into these cultures in a way that have got a more spiritual wisdom than we do. And that, of course, is not to say that the wisdom that's found in the Bible is not the spiritual wisdom, but there are different ways that we express that, right?
And I think sometimes there's miscommunication and understanding between the two cultures. Ancient church sometimes sees Māori practices, myths, legends, our spirituality, our tapuness as being wrong. And from my perspective, that is a misinformed thinking, misinformed thinking. And so with that comes a lot of discrimination.
Absolutely.
And that misunderstanding then creates distrust with your partner group. So I think we really have a long way to go in terms of talking past each other and really understanding what it is and who we are as cultures.
I have heard, and I find it even really awkward to ask the question because I realise it's offensive, but just for the sake of actually opening up the conversation, I have heard in the past people talk about Māori myths as being wrong, taniwha as being somehow evil. And can you talk me through that and educate me?
Well, let me begin by saying that Māori and Pākehā worldviews and spirituality contrast with each other hugely. And I think we both agree with that, where spiritual attitudes lie deep in respective worldviews. And sometimes neither the twain ever meet. So there's cultural misunderstanding about Christianity and Māori spirituality. And for centuries, in fact, as far back as Roman Catholic papal bull laws, I want to go there first. Māori and many indigenous cultures throughout the world were viewed as nothing more than uncivilized beasts, infidels, having evil beliefs, practices, and customs, okay? So the root of Māori spirituality, and I want you to hear this, Ingrid, lays deep in our ancestral heritage. It is something that we have in common with all Polynesian peoples and connects us to our ancestors through whakapapa. And whakapapa is genealogy. So it's keeping those links strong. The South African theologian David Bosch, have you ever heard of him? He once contrasted differences between Old Testament Hebrews and primitive Christian attitudes towards God. And he notes that Māori worldviews and their connected spiritualities are more reminiscent with Hebrews of the Old Testament, whereas he states the later Christian thought is strongly influenced by Greek philosophy. So Greek gods, Greek goddesses are based on Greek mythology and the realm of demigods. And you know where I'm heading with this because I'm trying to line it up. We are being accused of having evil practices. We have our kaitiaki. Kaitiaki are like the caretakers, kaitiaki of the whenua, kaitiaki of the moana, of the forest, they're guardians. Māori legends connect us to whakapapa, the genealogy that I talked about, and it keeps our bloodline strong. Our myths connect us to the stories of our whenua. And often when our elders are trying to track land and succeed whenua, they will go back to the stories that have been told to them by our tupuna and the tupuna before them. And that's what brings those connections together. We didn't have the written word, Ingrid. We had spoken word. So we would tie up our genealogies, our stories, our links, our bloodlines, our whenua connections through these myths and legends. And so I can only emphasise here that I don't see that as being evil at all. In terms of tapu, and you mentioned this in there as well, tapu speaks to us about respect and sacredness of people, creation, land, sea and forest, and the creator of all things. I o matua, I o te tama, I o te wairua tapu, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I put it to you that assumption knowledge is a very dangerous thing. It's a very dangerous supposition to process, especially in a 21st century.
Can you explain a little bit more what assumption knowledge is?
It's a term that I've created. So if you haven't heard it before, we assume that we know when we don't know.
And Pākehā do that all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
we assume we know what even a Māori myth is, and we don't. You know, not your, I can only speak for myself, but I feel very ignorant in that, But as you talked, I was thinking about, you talked about that connection with the Old Testament, and as you talked about whakapapa and genealogy, the connection to the land, these are all really strong themes in the Old Testament. And even kingitanga was based on King David, wasn't it? I come from kingitanga land, so I've learned a little bit more about it in the last few years. So this might be a bit hard to sort of just express in a podcast, but I feel like there's this natural connection to Old Testament being. And then what happens when you bring Jesus into that? How's that transformed those beliefs as well, or incorporated your Māoriness with Jesus?
Okay. I'm going to use my husband as a bit of a story here. And in terms of talking about when we bring Jesus into the equation. We were raised Catholic, all right? So we had slightly different teachings there. The Bible was reserved for families, and we never got to touch a Bible, all right? So we didn't know who Jesus was at that time. It was put in a special cupboard in our house, and it was only brought out when the priest came to visit and have a cup of tea with our parents, or a kai with our parents, and the best linen was brought out, and the statue of Holy Mary was put on the table, and the Bible, and we never knew about Jesus. I'm not saying that that we were ignorant of Jesus, but it was sacred in this sense that only the priests could really speak about who Jesus Christ was.
Right.
My husband grew up in a household that only knew God, and he was introduced to Jesus Christ. He was brought up strongly in tikanga and values surrounding our whenua and whakapapa and all of those things we've mentioned this morning. But in that, he had no idea who Jesus was until his 98-year-old queer, who loved to hear the word of God read in Te Ao Māori, would ask him, and koro was what she called him. Koro is the name for boy in Ngāpuhi. She would say, e koro, hara mai ki taku taha ki te pānui te paipera tapu. What she was saying was, will you come and read the Bible for me? And he'd sit at her feet, and he'd open this book, and he would read from Genesis all the way through the Bible. And he met Jesus Christ there. And he had a profound love for who Jesus was. And at quite a late stage in his, I call it late, in his life, he committed his life to God, to Jesus, and God. He knew then the wholeness of who God was.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Jesus is the wholeness of who God is. I feel like I've gained some really amazing insight into what Māori spirituality means and the fullness of it just in this short conversation. Are there ways that we exclude Māori that we need to repent of and change?
Well, I want to go deeper, dive deeper into this question. And I think first we need to be in a position to embrace and respect each other's cultures and look at our differences in that space. And everyone has difference. And however, no amount of difference can change the fact that we're all human. And that's a commonality for both cultures. Mutual respect and understanding of Māori is essential if we are to create an inclusive environment within the church. Because New Zealand churches have a legacy of othering people, of differences, and that creates barriers to acceptance and recognition. And these barriers are often systemic and include the way people look at you, the behaviours, the body language, facial expressions, and avoidance of being in the other's circle. It all adds up. And we have to examine our own attitude in terms of making Māori inclusive, feel inclusive, feel safe within our environment. And these are just a few of the stereotypical behaviours that need challenging when it comes to accepting diversity and difference. And we all know that creating safe environments encourage social interaction and a sense of belonging. But I ask the question, what does that look like for churches? Do we expect Māori to fit into our Pākehā niches? Where I can tell you most Māori won't feel comfortable. We must come up to par with other mainstream churches to create Māori core where Māori can feel they belong and where they feel valued. We need to grow Māori core officers and who can nurture and minister to Māori and show empathy, care, compassion and kindness towards Māori. At the moment, most of our Māori are clients under our social arm. And, you know, if we ever hope to see our seats filled with Māori, then we need to change the way we are doing things. And I hope to think that through this new Māori ministry framework model, that we'll see some changes in the future. I may not be here, then, but I hope that those changes will be gradually introduced and there will be a successor to put that in place.
You talked about in the traditional church branches where there's synods, and that's allowed cultures to express their Christianity in their own way. And I could almost imagine as a Pākehā people saying, well, why don't they just come into our churches? We don't want to be separate. And it made me think as I was listening to you about how a friend said to me recently that Pākehā have the option to not be bicultural, but Māori do not. They have to be bicultural. So if we just expect Māori to come into our church, then at best it will be invisible. So can you expand on, you mentioned about Māori core. Can you expand a little bit about your vision for that?
I envisage that Salvation Army would identify key areas within the Army that already exist. And by that time we would have identified Māori leaders, potential leaders for the future, who we can grow as officers, who we can grow as envoys and appoint into those cores, who will encourage Māori community to want to belong to what we have here. I mean, it's unique, but what I see is it's very white. I fit into this organisation because I'm used to working with any culture, and I can do that well. However, you know, I must admit there are times when I feel, do I really fit? Do I really belong? And I think we begin by examining ourselves and how we make Māori inclusive. And I keep saying, I am not the kapahaka girl. I am not the waiata girl. I come with a wealth of experience and, qualifications. If I'm not in the conversation, I don't want to be. I'm out. That's as simple as that. So value me for what I bring. Value me for the wisdom, the knowledge, the experience, and, that's all part of being inclusive. And when I say me, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about Māori in general.
Wonderful. I mean, this kind of leads me on, we talked about, just talking about biculturalism a little bit leads me on to the question of Te Tiriti, the Treaty of Waitangi. Can you explain for us why Te Tiriti is so important for all of us as a nation, and why as people of faith in particular we should be honouring Te Tiriti?
That's a good question. And, why should we? Should we be honouring the Treaty of Waitangi? Short answer, yes, we should. But I think our mainstream establishments need to come to terms with the fact that the Treaty of Waitangi was written and translated to become Te Tiriti o Waitangi by Pākehā. For Māori, We didn't write it.
Mm-hmm.
Our mainstream partner did.
Mm-hmm.
It was intended as a sequel to the doctrine of discovery to aid confiscation of Indigenous lands, not only here in Aotearoa, but across the world.
Mm.
However, today, under international contract law, which refers to the doctrine of discovery, have you ever heard of that, Ingrid?
No, I haven't, no.
And that contract law is called, it's Latin, preferente contra preferentum. It's a Latin term used in contract law, which broadly states that where there is doubt about the meaning of a contract drafted by a principal party, and the words will be examined against the principal party. I'm leading into this.
Mm-hmm.
This is called ambiguity rule, which often gets referred to as the doctrine of contra preferentum. And the Latin phrase essentially means that when we're choosing between two possible parties or groups where that meaning and understanding of a contract is ambiguous, not clear, confusing to the other party, then if there is an Indigenous copy document, then it is that document that will take precedence over the principal document. And that is why Māori referred to Te Tiriti or Waitangi and not the Treaty of Waitangi. Essentially what this means is that if an Indigenous interpretation is in fact the interpretation of the day, it takes precedence. And what do we mean by that? It's about sovereignty, Māori sovereignty. And I'll use Ngāpuhi as an example. We as a iwi had vow and declare that we never gave up our sovereignty, not ever. And that's about our lands, that's about equality of life, that's about making decisions regarding, ourselves in partnership. There's so much invested in this document. So having understood the answer to the first part of your question, I can tell you why it's important for ourselves as people of faith to be honouring of the Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And my short answer to this is that Te Tiriti o Waitangi was written and interpreted by Christians. All right, so under the doctrine of discovery, they were given authority, mana of the crown, to go and confiscate lands. All right, so in the name of the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit, and the nation. And I don't know whether you know this, but there are 4 articles of the Treaty of Waitangi. And you did?
I did know that.
Which is overlooked. And I should ask you the question, what was the 4th article, Ingrid?
I'm not even going to try and guess.
So it was a last-minute plea made by Bishop Pompalio on the 6th of February, just before the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi at Waitangi. And he broadly speaking, it states that the right to religion also entails affording the same right to others, ensuring it does not infringe on human rights. And it goes on to say that the state seeks to retreat all faith communities and those who possess no religion at all equally before the law. So there was a 4th article that gave place for religion, gave rightful passage for denominations to work with Māori to preach the word of God in this place called Aotearoa. So it goes on to say that it gives the church the same rights, no matter what denomination it is, to practice their religion in Aotearoa, but affording those with no religion the same rights as well. That included Māori who later created their own faith base beliefs. Rātana Church, Ringatu Church. They were all founded on Christian principle. And then they went off to create these Māori churches where they could speak and preach and pray in their own realm. But what is our moral and spiritual obligation as faith-based church? We have an obligation to uphold the treaty, Te Tiriti partnership, under the auspices of a great God who joined us together in holy matrimony. And we have an obligation to Māori to honour that sacred covenant.
So what does it look like to honour Te Tiriti?
That is a very good question, and it's a question that should be posed to the church. We as Māori know what it means in terms of partnership, and what does partnership look like in terms of church. Does that look like us sitting around the table together and forming decision, policy, mission together? Or does that look like us being a subcommittee of the whole organisation? Does it include people from community who have no faith base or a different faith base belief? Are we prepared to bring them in to the fold to be in partnership together? There's a whole lot of questions that need to be asked by our mainstream partners, our Pākehā partners. Māori know how to fit into that. We know how to contribute to that. So I guess, Ingrid, the question needs to be asked by the establishment itself. Yeah. How do we inform this practice?
Yeah. That's a really good challenge, I think, because it means thinking outside of ourselves, thinking in different ways, and what it means to be inclusive. I was really, my brother's actually a Māori historian. He was telling me a story that I found really heartbreaking because I think it just gave me a little glimpse. You were talking about the doctrine of discovery earlier, and I might have this wrong, but I'll just reflect back to you. What I was understanding from that is that part of the Christian doctrine was that of confiscating land. So
absolutely.
That is horrifying. It really is. And my brother was telling me that before land confiscations, 2/3 of Māori were going to church because they actually really welcomed the message of Jesus, and that Māori were able to, warring tribes reconciled through Jesus. So they really got it. Māori get it, get Jesus. And then under Christian auspices, land confiscations happened. And what my brother, Luke Goodwin, shout out, was telling me was that hundreds of branches of faith cropped up based on the cry to get the land back. So he was telling me about one where one part of the ceremony is they'd walk anti-clockwise in order to turn back the clock to before the land confiscations. And I feel that as Pākehā we can be so ignorant that we think that is something that Māori should shrug off. It was devastating loss of land, loss of identity and loss of whenua that cannot be just shrugged off. And it was actually a huge injustice done in the name of Christianity. And how do we even begin to address that?
I think first, and it's very difficult for us to admit, but we have to own our shameful history here in New Zealand. Colonisation and the effects of that on Māori. And the doctrine of discovery was about taking Indigenous lands, not only here but everywhere around the world. And simply, that came out of the Roman Catholic papal bulls laws, which allowed navigators to go and search the world for land. And all they had to do, Ingrid, was bury a trinket into the ground, a cross, a piece of cloth, Bibles, whatever it was, and then at a certain time go back to find where they had buried them and claim that land. For example, here in Aotearoa, the South Island was claimed from the sea. Basically, where you had certain seafaring captains standing offshore saying, I claim this land in the name of the king. And it became Crown land. Shameful is what I can say.
So essentially it's an invasion of one country to another that was sanctified by the church.
Yes.
And imagine if in this day and age, when one country invades another country, we see that as a war crime. And I won't name names because it might be too controversial, but the whole world is up in arms against this happening right now, and yet we accept that it happened in New Zealand, and we get actually quite defensive if we try and talk honestly about it. And you mentioned colonisation. One word that I've heard a lot in recent years is decolonisation. I'm trying to speak from the Pākehā perspective because that's all I've got. It's the kind of thing you hear a lot on talk radio about people just saying, can we just stop talking about this? Can you explain to me why we can't just stop talking about it, and what decolonisation means and why that's actually a good thing?
Well, decolonisation is about respecting Indigenous psychological and economic freedom and maintaining Indigenous sovereignty, the right and ability of Indigenous peoples to practice and the self-determination of over their land, over their cultures, over the political stance that they make, religion and economic systems. And for Ngāpuhi, the largest iwi in Aotearoa, as I mentioned before, we have vowed and declared that we never ceded our sovereignty. And as the largest iwi in Aotearoa, we are the last to settle our grievances with the Crown. And I don't think that is going to come anytime soon. So decolonisation is about recognising the sovereignty of Māori in this place. Who are we decoaling? Because for myself, and I look at myself in this, as part of growing up in a European Pākehā state, I've benefited from it. In fact, I've become bicultural in every sense. But my Pākehā partner has not become bicultural.
Yes,
so, right. Our mainstream partners sit comfortably in their own skin, and they don't tend to venture into a world of Te Ao Māori to try to understand how we operate, how we think, what we say, our cultural practices, etc. So decolonisation is confronting. It's uncomfortable. And it's not for Māori, it's for Pākehā.
Absolutely.
And so we must understand that. When we're decoaling, who are we decoaling? Because it's really about Pākehā coming to terms with, as I said, our shameful histories, owning it, embracing it, but finding solutions to address the wrongs that have been committed.
Yeah.
But you and I in this generation can't take the blame. We can't accept the fault. This happened long before our time and our ancestors' generation. So it's our responsibility to look for solutions as we go forward.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's really important to address that, actually, because a lot of the rhetoric is about why should we feel guilty for things that happened before us? And you're saying it's not about guilt. It's just about being honest about what actually happened. And I think that's, take the defences down and let's just be honest and be genuine with each other. And you were talking about Pākehā learning to be bicultural, and I think that's such a good point, because if we're really honest with ourselves as Pākehā, we find going into Māori spaces really intimidating, and yet we expect Māori to come into our space every day. And Māori have actually become really good at it and had to do it, but if we're Christians who believe in justice, then we should be reciprocating that sharing of space, right? Hey, something that has been recurring in my mind as we've been talking is that verse, and I'm not going to quote it properly, but we know it well, and that is to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with the Lord, the verse in Micah. And I think from my Pākehā perspective, as I sit here and learn from you, Amiria, the part that challenges me is to walk humbly. Sometimes we as Pākehā find it really hard to be humbled, to be told, actually we have to acknowledge that grievances have happened and are real, that the ambiguity over the treaty is real and that it was not honoured, and that terrible things have happened in our history, and to be humble about that and say, it's hard for me to hear that, but I'm willing to learn. And I feel like you've really done that for me today. I feel like I've, so-called sat at your feet and just absorbed what you've said and learned so much. And I'm sure that I speak for anyone who's listening to this as well. And I feel like it's been a real honour to hear your depth of mana, your wisdom, and your korero. So I just want to thank you so much. Often as Pākehā, we think, where do we even start with Te Tiriti? Well, it's a privilege to be able to learn. And I think that's a great place to start from a Pākehā perspective. Sometimes just giving over the spotlight actually is what we need to do, isn't it?
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you so much. Hei Matariki.
Hei Matariki.
Ai.
Ai.
Or is it ae? I o.
Ai.